The frigid morning air hung heavy over suburban Atlanta, Georgia, where the thermometer outside the courthouse barely crept past 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside, the packed courtroom buzzed with restless energy as weak sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. The space felt suffocating. Rows of benches creaked under the weight of spectators, reporters scratched furiously at their notepads, and a thick tension pulsed through the crowd like a live wire. At the defense table sat Sabrina Carter, a black woman in her early 40s, her navy blouse crisp and her curly hair pulled back tight. She held herself with a soldier's poise, back straight as a steel rod, her sharp eyes scanning the room like she was sizing up a battlefield. Beneath her calm exterior, though, a storm brewed, anger simmered in her chest, fueled by the injustice that landed her here, accused of resisting arrest and assaulting an officer. Across the room, Officer James Jim Russo loomed at the plaintiff's table, a hulking white man in a pristine police uniform, his smug grin cutting through the dim light. At 6 feet tall and built like a linebacker, he exuded the kind of arrogance that came with a badge and years of unchecked power. He leaned back, smirking at Sabrina as if the case was already in the bag. Then the gavel cracked, and Judge Margaret Evans swept in, a silver-haired woman with a no-nonsense stare that could silence a room. The whispers died as she took her seat, her weathered eyes narrowing at the scene before her. Sabrina leaned toward her lawyer, her voice a low growl laced with fury. "They think they can break me, Daniel. They don't know who I am, but today they'll pay for underestimating me." The courtroom's heavy silence shattered as Officer James Jim Russo swaggered to the witness stand, his polished boots thudding against the hardwood like a drumbeat of authority. The chill of that 40 degrees Fahrenheit morning outside seemed to follow him in, clinging to the crisp lines of his uniform. His smirk from earlier, sharp and cocksure as he'd stared down Sabrina Carter from across the room, still lingered, a predator sizing up prey he assumed was already cornered. Judge Margaret Evans nodded curtly, her silver hair glinting under the fluorescent lights, and Russo raised his right hand to swear the oath, his voice dripping with rehearsed confidence. Sabrina watched him, her fists clenched beneath the defense table, nails digging into her palms as the fury she'd whispered to Daniel, "They'll pay for underestimating me," burned hotter with every step he took. Russo settled into the stand, leaning forward slightly, his 6-foot frame filling the space like he owned it. "It was 3 weeks ago about 10 p.m., he began, his tone smooth as asphalt freshly laid on an Atlanta backroad. "I was patrolling 2 miles east of downtown when I spotted her, Sabrina Carter, lurking near a shuttered store on Peachtree Road. She was pacing the sidewalk looking shifty, hands stuffed in her pockets." He paused for effect, letting the image sink into the jury's minds. "I rolled up, asked her what she was doing out there in the dark. She got loud real quick, refused to show ID, started yelling, 'You got no right.' When I told her to calm down, she shoved me hard, damn near knocked me back 5 feet onto the curb. Then she lunged for my sidearm. I had no choice but to take her down." The gallery erupted in a low rumble, a mix of gasps and skeptical murmurs rippling through the crowd like wind over a Georgia cornfield. A woman in the back muttered, "Sounds like bullshit," loud enough for heads to turn, but Russo pressed on, unfazed, his voice rising with theatrical flair. "She hit me square in the chest, felt like a linebacker blindsiding me. I grabbed her arms, wrestled her to the ground. She was wild, thrashing like she'd take me out if I let up for a second." He rubbed his sternum as if reliving the ache, his eyes flicking to the jury with a practiced plea for sympathy. "I'm 220 pounds, trained for this, but she made me fear for my life that night." Sabrina's jaw tightened, her dark eyes narrowing to slits as she stared at Russo. Each lie twisted the knife deeper, stoking the inferno in her chest. She could still feel the cold pavement under her knees from that night, the sting of his grip on her arm, not the other way around. The crowd's whispers grew louder, some nodding along to Russo's tale, others shaking their heads in quiet disbelief. Judge Evans banged her gavel once, her stern voice cutting through, "Order!" But Sabrina's mind was elsewhere, replaying the moment Russo's flashlight had blinded her, his barked demands echoing in her ears. "He thinks he's untouchable," she thought, her pulse hammering. "But I've faced worse than him, and I'm still standing." As Russo stepped down, that smirk creeping back, Sabrina's resolve hardened. He'd painted her as the villain, but she'd ripped that canvas apart with the truth. The courtroom air thickened as Sabrina Carter rose from the defense table, her navy blouse catching the faint glow of the overhead lights. Each step toward the witness stand echoed like a war drum, deliberate and unyielding, a stark contrast to the swagger Russo had flaunted moments before. The chill of that 40 degrees Fahrenheit Atlanta morning still lingered in her bones, a memory tied to the night she'd been pinned against cold asphalt, not as the aggressor Russo painted, but as a woman fighting to hold on to her dignity. Her curly hair, pulled tight, framed a face etched with resolve, but her eyes burned with the same fury she'd whispered to Daniel in the opening hush. "They'll pay for underestimating me." Now, as Russo's lies hung in the room like a sour stench, she was ready to set the record straight. Sabrina settled into the stand, adjusting the microphone with a slow, steady hand, her voice rolling out like thunder over the Georgia hills. "I'm not the liar here," she said, her tone low but cutting, slicing through the murmurs still buzzing from Russo's tale. "That night I wasn't lurking anywhere. I just run 3 miles, part of my routine, and stopped on the sidewalk near Peachtree Road to tie my damn shoe. That's when he rolled up, headlights blazing, flashlight in my face like I was some stray dog he could kick around." She paused, letting the jury see the scene. A woman alone, 5'6" and 140 pounds, dwarfed by Russo's hulking frame. He barked, "What you doing out here?" I said I was heading home. When he demanded my ID, I asked why, calmly mind you. That's when he lost it. The gallery leaned in, breaths held as Sabrina's voice hardened. He didn't wait for an answer. He grabbed my arm, hard enough to leave bruises I carried for days, and twisted it back, till I thought it'd snap. I told him, "Let go, I'm not resisting," but he shoved me down, knee in my back, gravel biting into my skin. Her words cracked like a whip and a few jurors flinched. He snarled things, ugly, hateful things I won't repeat here, but you know the kind. Words meant to strip me bare, make me less than human. Her gaze locked on Russo, who shifted in his seat, that smug grin long gone, replaced by a twitch in his jaw. Sabrina's chest heaved, not from fear but from the fire of injustice blazing inside her. "I begged him to stop," she said, her voice rising, but he pressed harder, cuffed me, and claimed I went for his gun, a damn lie to cover his tracks. The room erupted, gasps, a choked sob from the back, and a man's voice growling, "That's a disgrace." Judge Evans slammed her gavel, but Sabrina's truth rang louder than the wood on wood. "I've faced hell you can't imagine," she thought, her mind flashing to missions overseas, but this was personal. Russo's story had painted her as a wild threat. Now she turned the canvas upside down, exposing the bully beneath the badge. As she sat back, her stare bore into him, unblinking. The wall of his lies was cracking, and she'd bring it crashing down. The courtroom trembled on the edge of chaos as Sabrina Carter stepped down from the witness stand, her navy blouse now a banner of defiance in the flickering light. The fury she'd whispered to Daniel in that frigid 40 degrees Fahrenheit morning, "They'll pay for underestimating me," had ignited with every word she'd spoken, tearing through Russo's flimsy tapestry of lies like a Georgia storm ripping through a paper roof. His smug recounting of her as a wild threat, shoving him 5 feet back, lunging for his gun, had crumbled under her steady truth. A woman tying her shoe, blindsided by his aggression, pinned to the ground with gravel in her skin. Now, as the gallery buzzed with restless outrage, her lawyer, Daniel Hayes, rose like a conductor ready to unleash the final crescendo. Daniel adjusted his tie, his youthful face set with a fire that matched Sabrina's own. "Your Honor," he said, voice smooth but edged with steel, "my client isn't just some civilian Russo thought he could break. She's Major Sabrina Carter, 15 years in the U.S. Air Force Special Operations, a goddamn American hero." The room gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air dry. He slapped a stack of papers onto the table, medals, commendations, discharge records, and held up a USB drive like a loaded gun. "And this is the nail in his coffin." Video from a bystander's phone 200 feet down Peachtree Road, showing every second of his attack. Russo's face drained to ash, his 220-pound frame shrinking as Daniel plugged the drive into the court system. The screen flared to life, and the shaky footage rolled, a grainy night lit by headlights, Russo's flashlight stabbing into Sabrina's eyes. "What you doing out here?" his voice barked, harsh and unyielding. "Heading home," she replied, calm as a still lake, but he lunged, wrenching her arm back 180 degrees, slamming her into the pavement with a thud that echoed through the speakers. "People like you don't ask questions," he snarled, and the room exploded, screams of "liar" and "shame" ricocheting off the walls. Sabrina stood at the defense table, her fists balled, and then her voice broke free, raw and thunderous. "I hauled men out of burning wrecks in Afghanistan. I ran 10-mile missions under fire. And this coward dares call me a threat on my own soil?" Tears streaked her face, not of weakness but of a rage so deep it shook the air. Judge Evans pounded her gavel, but the crowd's fury drowned it out. A man leapt up, roaring, "Lock him up!" Russo stammered, "I didn't know," she didn't say, but his words drowned in the tide of Sabrina's truth. The video looped his venomous "people like you," and Daniel turned to the jury, voice low and lethal. "He didn't just lie. He assaulted a warrior who'd bleed for this country." Sabrina's gaze locked on Russo, her 5'6" frame towering in spirit. She'd faced death overseas, now she'd bury his lies here. The wall wasn't just cracking, it was dust. The courthouse doors swung open, spilling Sabrina Carter into the late afternoon sun, its golden rays cutting through the lingering chill of that 40 degrees Fahrenheit Atlanta day. The tension that had choked the room, born of Russo's smug lies, her simmering fury whispered to Daniel, and the thunderclap of her truth as a special ops major, dissolved into a chorus of cheers from the steps. After 2 grueling hours, the jury had returned, their foreman's voice steady as granite. "We find Sabrina Carter not guilty on all charges." Russo's tale of her shoving him 5 feet and grabbing for his gun had shattered against her calm recounting and that damning video. His snarl of "people like you," still echoing in every ear. The jury didn't stop there, demanding an investigation into Russo's brutality, a call Judge Evans met with a grave nod. "Officer Russo, get a lawyer, this ain't over." Sabrina stood tall, her 5'6" frame a monument of resilience, as cameras flashed like gunfire. "This isn't just my win," she declared, voice ringing over the crowd. "It's for every soul crushed by a badge that's supposed to protect." Daniel clapped her shoulder, pride in his eyes, while Russo slunk away, suspended, his 220-pound bravado reduced to a ghost facing perjury charges. The video, her medals, her roar of battles fought 10 miles under fire, they turned his wall of deceit to rubble. Months later, Sabrina faded back to her quiet life, but her name lingered, a beacon for the silenced. She'd stared down worse than Russo in deserts half a world away, now she'd carved justice from his lies. "Truth don't bend," she'd said, and as the crowd roared, it stood unbroken, a victory not just won, but forged in the fire of her unyielding spirit. Sabrina Carter's story isn't just a courtroom drama, it's a blueprint for standing tall when the world tries to knock you down. Her fight against Russo's lies teaches us that truth, though buried under power and prejudice, can break free with courage and grit. The lesson? Don't let anyone define you by their biases, whether it's a badge, a title, or a stereotype. Sabrina's 15 years hauling heroes from hell overseas didn't bend her. Neither should your battles break you. The message is clear. Justice isn't handed out, it's claimed. In today's world, where voices get drowned out by noise, speak up, back it with proof, and hold fast. Advice? When you're underestimated, turn it into your strength. Let them trip over their own arrogance. Truth doesn't just win, it reshapes the game. Stand your ground because you're tougher than they think. Thank you for watching the video. Please comment with number 1 to let me know you have watched the whole video. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to always receive new videos as soon as possible.